Hello chess friends and welcome to your Out of Chess channel and welcome back to the FIDE Grand Swiss tournament in 2021. We're now in the round 4 of the super event and we're following now a brilliant and beautiful game played by the legend of this beautiful game that we left to play by Alexei Shirov. Alexei Shirov is really a legend of the 90s as he was the second best rated player back in 1994, and there is really a cool story about Alexei Shirov. Alexei Shirov in 1998 won his super match against Vladimir Kramnik, and because of some rules he should have played in the 2000 World Championship match against Garry Kasparov, but this thing never happened, as official statements are that there were simply no sponsorships that could maybe provide this very cool match game. So in 2000 Vladimir Kramnik was the one that played against Garry Kasparov. I'm not sure really about this backgrounds of the story. I'm really not a chess historian. I really don't know really the facts why this game really never has been played between Garry Kasparov and Alexei Shirov, but I think it would be really a dynamic game as really Alexei Shirov, maybe Vasily Ivanchuk and of course Garry Kasparov were simply the best attackers back from the 90s. So what's going on now in the FIDE Grand Swiss tournament? It's that Alexei Shirov is playing really some brilliant chess. Now these days Alexei Shirov is almost 50 years old, so it's really a brilliant thing to see how even when you maybe a little bit older than other players, still you see this old grandmasters like for instance Vishy Anand, Alexei Shirov, also Vasily Ivanchuk. These guys, when they have they can really beat anyone, and that's why I decided to show really a brilliant game here by Alexei Shirov from the round 4 against his landsman Artur Snakeshan. So here you'll witness really the most important also strategical elements of the Ruy Lopez game, of this Martinez variation. I think this Martinez variation is also a very nice and popular approach in the Ruy Lopez game, and here you witness also brilliant tactical shot that Alexei Shirov of course saw, because when, as I said, Alexei Shirov has his day, then he can destroy any defense. So let's check out now this game. Here e4 played by Shirov. We have e5 here by Nxd5. So we have knight to f3, knight to c6, and after bishop to b5. Here Artur Nxd5 plays now the Murphy defense with move a6. We have bishop to a4. We have knight to f6, and here after move casting we have again the closed Ruy Lopez here with the move bishop to e7. So here d3. Now this is the so-called Martinez variation. There are of course lines in which we can play here the move rook to e1. This move d3 is of course seemingly passive move, but I think d3 we would have played in the continuation of the game anyway. Now the main goal is again some move like c3, then bishop to c2, and again maybe build this central breakthrough idea with the move d4. So here Nxd5 plays of course the normal idea, b5 kicks away the bishop. We have now bishop to b3 and again d6. So again the position like this has been played millions and millions of times in chess history, so this is now a common position in closed Ruy Lopez games. So here in the continuation we have now a4 immediately. This is now a pragmatic idea always by white, because black is of course some kind of a space advantage on the queen side. With the move a4 we're undermining a little bit the main advantage of black. So with the move a4 black has now to make a clarification. Black has to take or will pass through with the move b4. So or will maybe protect this pawn by playing rook to b8, then after a takes b5, a takes b5 would be a possibility. There is still this tension on the a file, so that's why this rook has to be maneuvered, or you have to play maybe really an unpopular move like bishop to b7. But as I said, with the move a4 I think black has to react immediately. So in the continuation of the game we have now this clarification by black. Black plays simply here a passing through move with the move b4. So we have knight to d2, because now the pawn is not on b5 anymore. Now we can use on b5 now we can use the c4 square, and we can use now this squares in order to maneuver our knight on very active squares. For instance on d5, f5 are now the main targets in black's position. These are weaknesses. Of course when you play a chess game there are basically two weaknesses that you can gain. It can be weak pawn and also weak square. These are the main weaknesses. So I think now by playing the move b e4. Here from white's perspective, at least we have provoked some weaknesses. Now it's at least we know where to attack. So here after move knight from b to d2, castling played by Nixons, we have now knight to c4. You see here immediately here Alexashirov is using now the squares in order to centralize the knight. We have now rook to b8 and now c3, because c3 maybe it's not necessary immediately, maybe as a long-term plan in the future, but what white is not tolerating here is of course this advanced pawn. So that's why whenever you feel pressured by one pawn, by maybe one piece of your opponent, when this piece or pawn gets on your side of the board, then we want to undermine it. That's why c3 also a natural idea, although it's not maybe, as I said, the suggested move by the engine, but it's really a pragmatic idea by Alexei Shirov. That's what I like about this old masters, by this maybe top grandmasters from the 90s, because these guys are not playing computer moves. These guys are playing really healthy theoretical moves that they learned maybe from some chat books, maybe by some teachers. These guys don't rely on computer engines. These guys are relying simply on their feeling, on their tactical calculations. So that's why I love to play. I love to watch, of course, Alexei Shirov game, of course, Vasily Ivanchuk games, also Vishy Anand games from the 90s are really also dynamic. So that's why, as I said, I really love the 90s, especially when it comes to chess. I love the 90s when it comes to movies and music, of course, but chess was also very, very beautiful thing in the 90s. So here after move c3, we have b takes c3, we have b takes c3, and now h6. Maybe the slightly better idea here for black would have been this aggressive move bishop to g4. Bishop to g4 is of course creating now a positional threat with bishop takes f3, queen to f3, and you see the bishop is hanging. So you would be forced then to play g takes f3, and if that happens, you would have of course a weakened pawn structure here in front of the king. So that's why this move bishop to g4 would actually force a passive move by white, bishop to c2 or bishop to a2. So here in the continuation after b takes c3, h6, and now knight to e3. So it's like almost like Shirov is saying, okay, you had your chance with bishop to g4, now this move is not going to happen in the continuation of the game. So rook to e8, we have queen to c2, we have now knight to a5 attacking the bishop, bishop to a2, and now bishop to f8. Bishop to d2, simply developing further also the darker bishop, and again finishing the development, connecting the rooks is of course one of the most important ideas in openings. So here after move bishop to d2, we have now c6, keeping the pawn structure symmetrical and flexible. Now d5 is of course also an opportunity for black, but also d4 is now an opportunity for white. So you have to be careful, because if you do that, then of course the e4 pawn and the e5 pawn are then clear targets, clear weaknesses. So you should calculate before you of course push some pawns in the center of the board. So here after move c6, we have rook from a to b1. Again, normal ideas, because this is now the only open file on the board. So that's why we have to play a competition on that file with our rook. So that's why rook to b1, normal idea. Rook takes b1, rook takes b1, and you see, because of a faster development, it's actually Alexei Shirov that won the battle on the only open file on the b file. It's of course a slight advantage here for white. So d5 immediately here by Nechkins, because here you see with the move d5 we're at least creating some menace now in the center of the board, because of course what black is hoping for is here to get maybe an open e file. Then of course here with this rook to e8 move, black could have also some kind of an advantage. So with the move d5, black is hoping that the center gets open. So after e takes d5, we have c takes d5, and now d4 here by Alexei Shirov, which was now the correct pawn to move, because if you play c4, maybe you would hope here this move d4, and then you have this pass pawn on the c file. But that's actually not such a good position anymore for white, because you can maybe play knight to d5, and it's not the point that black will take. Black will never take, I think, here the centralized knight, because then after c takes d5, this pawn gets very, very annoying. It's really hard to battle against this pawn, and also the knight would be a little bit kicked out, because after the, I don't know, let's see, this one, knight takes d5, c takes d5, you see there are no good squares anymore for the knight. The c4 square is taken, also the c6 square is taken. Now this is a very annoying pawn, as I said, to handle. But after move here after move knight to d5, black doesn't have to react. Black can play here a brilliant move, knight to b7, and then cement the position here with the move knight to c5. Black would find a great way to create a blockade here on c5, and you'll never be able to push your pawn anymore to c5. So this pass pawn on the c file wouldn't be so important, I think, in the continuation of the game. So here after move d4, that's why knight to c6 was played. Here we have queen to b3, and now e4. The pawn structure gets, of course, blocked out here in the center of the board. Knight to e1. Knight to e5 is, of course, not good because you lose simply. Knight takes e5, d takes e5, and then rook to e5, although you have some kind of a pressure here around the square d5, but it's something that white should not do. So white has to play now a passive move, knight to e1. But that was actually part, I think, of Alexei Shirov's calculations, because he can now maneuver the knight to c2, and where the knight maybe can be useful here on the queen side. So basically here Alexei Shirov maneuvered all of his pieces towards the queen side, because obviously that's the side where he is better, because he can maybe finally push somehow the pawn on c4. He has now also an attack against the weak d5 square. So as I said, this is now the cornerstone of the attack. So here in the continuation, bishop to e6, played by Nations, we have now queen to b7 here by Shirov, getting use of this open b file, as we said. Here we have queen to a8, and now after knight to c2, you see finally Shirov maneuvers the knight towards the queen side. We have knight to a5 attacking the queen. Queen takes a8, and after rook takes a8, rook to b6. And from this point on, the fun really starts. It was so far a positional struggle, positional battle. Now we'll see really the brilliant Alexei Shirov from the 90s. Now we'll see the tactical beast Alexei Shirov. Be prepared from this game. This game becomes really a tactical brilliancy. So here, after move knight to d7, here of course Alexei Shirov get challenged, and most of us would play something like rook to b2, rook to b1. Still maybe white slightly better because of the activity on the b file, but not Alexei Shirov. And if you put now this position into an engine, this engines of these days will not suggest you the move that Alexei Shirov is playing. But actually there is a certain psychological thing about tactics. Whenever you maybe pull off a dangerous tactic, it has sort of a psychological aspect on your opponent. So maybe your opponent had a calm game till this particular moment, and you expecting maybe, as I said, Shirov to play rook to b2, rook to b1. You're expecting maybe a normal move, but then suddenly you face a tactical shot. And when that happens, I faced it many times when I play chess. I'm stunned. I don't know how to react anymore to this position. I was I was feeling very well in this position, but when my opponent found really a tactical shot, then I didn't feel so good anymore in the continuation of the game, because I felt really pressured. And that's actually what happened, I think, here in this game between Shirov and Nations. Here Shirov pulled off a very nice tactical and brutal shot. Here he played rook takes e6. Really wild stuff. After f takes e6, now knight to d5. Brilliant tactic, because if you take e takes d5, then of course bishop to d5 wins further material, and the game is simply over. So that's why great calculations by Shirov. After knight to d5, there is now only one good move, and it's, as I said, sometimes when you face this tactical shot, you cannot calculate anything anymore. You're just playing a wrong move, then this other move is also not the best of moves. Here, the best move is simply to play maybe here rook to c8. Rook to c8, still maybe slightly better here for white. Because of this tactic, you have to play something like knight to f6. This is now the main issue. You don't want to have clear stake with knight takes f6, because again you get this idea, bishop to e6, and then you lose the rook. So you would be forced to play g takes f6, but now after bishop takes e6, the king has to move, and we can take out the knight. And still, this is a very complicated game, because white has now two connected pawns here on the queen side. But what Nechkins played here after move knight takes d5, he played rook to a7. He was probably bothered by this potential possibility of the move knight to f6, and here the fun, as I said, started, because here Alexei Shirov has now this move, knight to f4. The problem is now in this particular scenario, let's go back. After g takes f6, and here this idea bishop takes e6, at least black has also two connected pawns. That's now, I think, a much better position than this one that black gained, because after knight takes d5, as we said, knight to f4, and here after knight to e6, you see this is now an isolated pawn. That's now a huge difference, because we have not connected this g pawn to the e pawn, and here this isolated pawn can be, of course, an object of white's attack in the continuation of the game. So that's why I think there is always a psychological aspect of some tactics that you can face and that you can play, of course. So here black didn't react correctly, didn't find the best continuation, because I think black was simply stunned. That's what I meant when you face some tactics. Sometimes you don't feel very well when that happens to you. So here after move knight to e6, we have bishop to e7, now knight to e3, controlling, of course, the c4 square. Here in the continuation we have king to h8, we have now c4. Now you see the pawns are marching, and the most important thing, as I said, is also to recognize that this pawn on e4 is a simple target. So knight to c6, we have a5, kicking away the bishop, kicking away the knight to d7. We have now c5, simply marching with these pawns. Both of these pawns are simply storming towards the edge of the board, and of course they're kicking away all of these minor pieces of blacks. Here in continuation we have knight to f8, knight takes f8, bishop to f8, bishop to c3. Here, of course, Shirov improves all of these pieces. Here we have rook to b7. The cool part about this bishop setup is that both of these bishops are controlling this 3 square. So the rook cannot come on the third rank because the bishop is controlling the square. The rook cannot go on the second rank. The rook cannot also go on the back rank. So that's why it's now completely winning endgame here for Shirov. So here we have d5, knight to a5. We have c6, simply pushing the pawn further. We have rook to b5, c7. We have now rook to c5, attacking the bishop, and now bishop takes a5. Brilliant move by Shirov, because if you take, of course, then we can promote. Here in the continuation, black tried rook to c1, and now knight to f1, controlling, of course, the first rank. We have now bishop to d6, g4, creating some breathing spaces. Now after bishop takes c7, we have bishop takes c7, rook to c7, and now knight to e3. And again, I'm pointing out, imagine now this position maybe with these two pawns connected, if this pawn on the g file would be already on the f file. So then I think black could also create some dynamics on the king side. That's why I think, as I said, the main problem was this move rook to a7 by Nation. So here in the continuation, after move knight to e3, rook to c1, king to g2, we have king to g8, bishop to c4, we have now rook to a1. Even if you play a5, maybe if you try here to push the pawn further, maybe you want also to create some threats, it's simply too slow, because d6 can happen. You have to move your king to f8. Then we play, of course, bishop to b5. We're threatening now also the move d7. Maybe you can attack the bishop like this. Bishop to a4, you can maybe get your king closer to the pawn, but actually we can simply push the pawn here on d7. Even if you get your king here, we can play knight to f5. You have to move your king, and now after move knight to g7, there's not a good way anymore to control this e6 square. So again, black is simply lost. So really great endgame technique here by Shirov. So after move bishop to c4, we have seen now this analysis. After potential move a5, in the continuation we have now rook to a1, d6 anyway, we have king to f8, bishop to e6, controlling all of the squares that the king cannot get closer to the pawn. We have now a5, we have d7, king to e7. Again, this idea knight to f5. If you take the bishop, of course, then we have a promotion on d8. We have king to d8, and now after this move knight to d6, in this position black resigned. So the main threat is, of course, knight to f7 or knight to b7. You have to move then the king, and we'll simply promote here a new queen. So really brilliant game by Shirov. Brilliant tactics with the stunner. Rook takes bishop on e6. You see how Shirov calculates these tactics, went into wild endgame with these two connected pawns, creating really some dynamics. So really great game by the forgotten legend of this game that we left to play by Alexei Shirov. So okay, I hope that you enjoyed this game. I really enjoyed it a lot. After this win, Alexei Shirov is now on the top of the table. He has now 3 points. Alireza Firouzja is is in the lead with 3.5 points, so maybe Alexashidov can also make it. Maybe it's his tournament. I wish him all of the best, because as I said, he was really one of my favorite players back from the 90s. So okay, if you want to see more commented chess games, check out my commented chess games that we have analyzed before from some other tournaments and from some other great games in the past. And if you want to see maybe some analysis of top engine games, check out my commented chess games played by computers with some great games played by Stockfish, Lila C0, Alpha 0, and many more. And if you like this content, don't forget to subscribe to my channel. See you soon with some more videos, and chess is the best, of course.